Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. Really quick, before we jump into today's episode, I just want to tell you about an exciting event that's coming up this weekend with Memory's Journey. Memory's Journey is a 12-hour Commander stream dedicated to raising money to support Alzheimer's research. As you might be aware, Alzheimer's is a disease that has impacted many families out there, including my own. So a huge thank you to Command the Cause, Commander-at-Arms, Deck Tuner, and Monarch for putting this together. 13 guests, including myself, are going to be joining this stream to help support this awesome cause. So make sure you tune into the stream on this Saturday, October 2nd. The stream starts at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and goes all the way to 11 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's going to include some of your favorite Magic content creators and Magic personalities. I'll be joining the stream to play a game of Commander at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Zach and Cal from Playing with Power and our host Jake. So make sure you check out that game and all the other ones in the entire event schedule you can find in the description below. Thank you in advance for joining us and supporting this awesome cause. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So you might be wondering what exactly today's episode is going to entail. I mean, between the thumbnail and the title, what exactly does this deck do? Now, I've made a lot of decks that are pretty off the wall, but this just might be the most out there deck of all time. I mean, this deck is so out there that your opponents are going to have absolutely no idea what in the world you are doing until it's too late for them. So, what exactly is this deck? What does it want to do? And who in the world is the commander for this deck? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Now, the commander for this deck is Esika, God of the Tree. But though Esika is the commander, this deck is pretty much not built around Esika at all. Now, in a way, it is built around the backside of Esika with the Prismatic Bridge. But in a way, it also kind of isn't. Let's go over this card first and then let me explain. So the Prismatic Bridge is the back of the MDFC god Esika, and it's a legendary enchantment for Wooburg. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, there are a lot of decks out there that have built around this commander, specifically this legendary enchantment side. Getting a powerful creature or planeswalker off the top of your library every single turn can be an incredibly powerful thing. It's a 5-color commander, so it gives you access to every single card that you could possibly want, and yeah, you can get some really big creatures out into play. So of course, many players have built around this with things like God Tribal, or Dragon Tribal, or Eldrazi Tribal, or yes, even Super Friends. So pretty much every single Prismatic Bridge deck is looking to get another powerful creature or another powerful planeswalker off the top of their library every single turn. Although you don't know exactly what you're going to hit, it's going to be powerful and it's going to be free. But I decided to take this commander in a different direction. Instead of looking to get a ton of free creatures or planeswalkers off the top of my library into play for free, I'm only looking to get one. That's right, this deck is not built around the Prismatic Bridge. It is built around getting one specific creature out with the Prismatic Bridge. And that means that the only way to guarantee that is to literally only have one creature in this entire deck. And of course, no planeswalkers either. Because again, with just that one creature in this deck, we are guaranteed to hit it every single time with the Prismatic Bridge on that upkeep trigger. And thanks to the Prismatic Bridge being our commander though, another nice benefit is that we get access to all 5 colors. So thank you, Wooburg Prismatic Bridge. So the actual secret commander for this deck that this entire deck is built around is, of course, the golden pig of this deck, which is the number 1 card out of 99, and that card is Deep Glow Skate. Deep Glow Skate is a 3/3 fish for 4 and a blue that says, when it enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. Now, Deep Glow Skate is typically a card that you see pretty much exclusively in Planeswalker decks and +1/+1 counter decks. Being able to double up your ++1 counters or loyalty counters on your planeswalkers can be a very powerful thing. But I personally have never seen an entire deck built around Deep Glow Skate. And yeah, this deck is most definitely not +1/+1 counters or planeswalkers. It definitely can't be planeswalkers because again, with the Prismatic Bridge, we would hit those off the top, and then we couldn't guarantee that we'd actually hit this. So yeah, sorry, no Super Friends. But this deck is going to be looking to use and abuse the ETB on Deep Glow Skate over and over again. And believe me, our permanents are going to have a lot of things to double with this. And then double again, and double again. Now, one quick note before we jump into the cards and the kinds of counters that we're going to be doubling. Deep Glow Skate is a card that's just slightly out of my normal budget parameters of cards that are less than $1. Being the secret commander, I actually made an exception for this card. And actually, coming up here in a bit, we're going to get to a second card that I made an exception for, just because I actually put this deck together and I already had that other card and it's just barely over $1. We'll get to it here. Regardless, outside of the commander, Deep Glow Skate, and one other card, every single card in this deck is a less than $1, so yes, this deck is incredibly budget friendly. And with all that said, let's jump into the rest of the cards and talk about exactly what we want to do with Deep Glow Skate in this deck. As I mentioned before, we're going to be utilizing a lot of different kinds of counters, including charge counters, which we see on Astral Cornucopia, Everflowing Chalice, and Empowered Auto Generator. And actually, really quick, Astral Cornucopia is that card that I did mention that's just slightly outside of the normal budget parameters. It's around $150, but again, I already had it, and I put the deck together, so I included it here. Regardless, it's an artifact that costs XXX and enters battlefield with X charge counters on it, and we can tap it to choose a color and add 1 mana of that color for each charge counter on it. So yeah, essentially, all we need to do is get at least one counter on Astral Cornucopia, and it has the potential to generate us an absurd amount of mana thanks to Deep Glow Skate. Again, every single time we get Deep Glow Skate's ETB, we double up the number of counters on it. So even if we just start off at 1, doubling it we go to 2, then doubling again we go to 4, and then doubling it again we go to 8. And believe me, we've got plenty of ways to get that ETB over and over again. And then Everflowing Chalice is somewhat similar. It's an artifact for 0 with multi-kicker 2 and enters battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked, and it taps for a colorless for each charge counter on it. Next up, there's Empowered Auto Generator, which enters the battlefield tapped, and we can tap to put a charge counter on it and add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of charge counters on it. So this one can actually add to itself throughout the game, and again, Deep Glow Skate can double it up too. So yeah, these mana rocks have a ton of potential thanks to our secret commander. Next up, even a card like Chiron Toy has a lot of potential in this deck too. It's an artifact for 3 that has pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on it, and we can tap it to remove X charge counters from it and X plus 1 colorless mana to our mana pool. And the component pouch has a lower ceiling but can still be very effective in this deck. Essentially, we tap it to roll a d20, and if we get a 1 through 9, we get 1 counter on it. If we roll a 10 through 20, we get 2 counters on it. By tapping to remove a component counter from it, we add 2 mana of different colors. So if we're set up correctly, after that first roll, we don't actually have to roll this again. This is just an artifact that costs 3 and can tap for 2 mana of different colors. One card that has an incredible amount of potential in this deck, though, is Replicating Ring. It can tap to add 1 mana of any color. In the beginning of our upkeep, we put a night counter on it. Then if it's got 8 or more night counters on it, remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicated Ring with tap add 1 mana of any color. So this can essentially give us 8 more artifacts, and then it can start doing that again. And speaking of a different kind of a benefit on a mana rock, let's talk about Midnight Clock. It taps for a blue, and by paying 2 in a blue, we put an hour counter on it. In the beginning of each upkeep, we get an hour counter on it. Then when the 12th hour counter is put on it, we shuffle our hand and graveyard into our library, then draw 7 cards and exile Midnight Clock. So this can help us refill our hand, and if Deep Glow Skate happens to get dealt with and it's in our graveyard, we can get it back into our library, and the Prismatic Bridge can get it back into play. And then Pyramid of the Pantheon has pay 2 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool and put a brick counter on it. Once it has 3 brick counters on it, we can tap it for 3 mana of any one color. And then Spear of the Suns comes in and play with 3 charge counters on it, and we can tap to remove a charge counter from it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. So for all intents and purposes in this deck, this is basically an Arcane Signet which comes into play tapped. Next up, some mana sources that can help us out in different ways are Mana Bloom, Iceberg, and Pentad Prism. Mana Bloom is going to come into play with X charge counters on it, and by moving a charge counter from it, we add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool, but we can only activate this once each turn. Again, by getting more and more counters on this, we can essentially utilize a free mana on every single player's turn. But something with even more potential is Iceberg. It's going to come into play with X ice counters on it, and by removing an ice counter from it, we add colors to our mana pool. Again, every single time we get Deep Glow Skate's ETB, the number of Iceberg counters on this is going to double. So you can see how that can get out of control, giving us a ton of free mana. But a card that can be even more impactful, though, is Pentad Prism. It has Sunburst, so it enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each color mana spent to cast it. And then by removing a charge counter from it, we add 1 mana of any color. Essentially, what we want to do with this is get 2 charge counters on it, and then just double it, and then double it, and then double it, and double it, and you know what? We've got an absurd amount of free mana of any color. Yeah, once we get things set up, we can do some really incredible things. And speaking of getting set up, a card that is absolutely incredible in this deck and would have been the Golden Pig had it not been for Deep Glow Skate being the Golden Pig is Tel Jalad Stylus. It's an artifact for one that has tap, put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library. This is an incredibly simple card, but one that is incredibly impactful with our commander. Or should I say the combination of our commander and our secret commander. This is essentially a free ETB for Deep Glow Skate on each of our turns, while it also is a way to protect it too. Again, putting Deep Glow Skate on the bottom of our library is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a very good thing. Because again, thanks to our deck only having one creature or planeswalker, that being Deep Glow Skate, we are guaranteed to hit it. So if someone tries to get rid of Deep Glow Skate, we just tuck it on the bottom of our library, and then you know what? We're getting it back for free. That's another ETB where we double up all of our counters. So yeah, this card can be incredibly impactful in this deck. And speaking of impactful, this next card sees play in basically no decks. According to EDH Rec, it sees play in exactly 86 decks. And for good reason, because for the vast majority of decks, this card is pretty useless. Rashad Pawn Shop is an artifact for 2 that has pay 2 in tap, shuffle target non-token permanent you control to its owner's library. Yeah, most decks don't want to do that, but we very much do. Again, getting Deep Glow Skate shoveled into our library is a very good thing. So we're also going to be running Dizzy Spell, which has Transmute for 1 blue, so yeah, this is just a fantastic way to actually go tutor for a 1-mana artifact, like, you know, Tel'Gelad Stylus. Or if we need to go get Elixir of Immortality, that can most definitely help us out as well. It has pay 2 and tap it, you gain 5 life, shuffle it in your graveyard into their owner's library. So again, if Deep Glow Skate gets dealt with as in our graveyard, this can be a fantastic way to get it back into our library to start things over again. And actually, I should mention that this card can actually help us win in combination with another card that I'll bring up here in a bit. Regardless, next up we've got some more flexible ways to get Deep Glow Skate into our library or to get rid of something else. Expel from Raska has Ascend, and it says return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, but if you've got the City's Blessing, you can put that permanent on top of its owner's library instead. Unexpectedly Absent is somewhat similar. It's going to put target non-land permanent into its owner's library just beneath the top X cards of that library. And then Oblation is going to make the owner of target non-land permanent shuffle into the library, then draw 2 cards. So these can deal with something an opponent has, or again, they can get Deep Glow Skate back into our library. Speaking of which, there's also Bant Charm, which is a very flexible card. It says choose 1 destroy target artifact, put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library, or counter target instant spell. And then we also have some artifacts that can help us deal with our opponent's things with Transmogrifying Wand and Lux Cannon. The wand is going to enter the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it, and by paying 1 and tapping it to remove a charge counter from it, we destroy target creature. In exchange, its controller is going to get a simple 2/4 Ox creature token. Again, typically this would be limited to just 3 uses, but again with Deep Glow Skate, we are not limited at all. And then Lux Cannon is an incredible card in this deck. It can tap to a charge counter on it and tap to remove 3 charge counters from it to destroy target permanent. So again, at a certain point, we don't even have to tap it to get more charge counters on it. We just have to keep getting our commander's ETB over and over again to get a ton of charge counters on this and just use this whenever we want. Next up, some other ways to protect us from our opponent's things are things like Palliation Accord and Prism Array. Palliation Accord has whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, put a shield counter on Palliation Accord. And then by removing a shield counter from it, we prevent the next 1 damage to be dealt to us this turn. So this can protect us from a lot of damage, again, just by our opponents attacking and tapping their creatures or tapping them for different reasons. We can get a lot of charge counters on this and then double them up and then double them up and then just prevent basically all the damage that's going to be dealt to us. And we can actually tap our opponent's creatures down to prevent them from attacking us in the first place with Prism Array. And as Converge, it's going to enter the battlefield with a crystal counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. By removing a crystal counter from it, we tap down target creature. So yeah, once we get going, it's going to be very hard for our opponents to ever attack us again. But we also, you know, can just protect ourselves by wiping out their armies with things like Divine Reckoning, Doomblast, and Hallowed Burial. Divine Reckoning says each player chooses a creature they control, destroy the rest, and it's got a flashback cost of 5 white. Doomblast says choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. So yeah, with each of these, again, this deck basically just revolves around 1 creature, so we just need to keep Deep Glow Skate in play and everything else can go. And speaking of everything going, Hallowed Burial is fantastic in this deck. It says put all creatures on the bottom of their owner's libraries. So this can very much deal with all of our opponent's creatures, again, even if they've got Indestructible or can regenerate, and on top of that, we get Deep Glow Skate on the bottom of our library, which is exactly what we want. But while we're getting things set up, what are some other ways that we can protect ourselves and our things? First up, we're going to be running cards like Blacksmith Skill, Negate, and Unwind. Blacksmith Skill is going to give target permanent Hexproof and Indestructible until end of turn. So if an opponent's trying to take out our Bridge or Deep Glow Skate, we can just protect it with this. And then of course, Negate and Unwind can both counter target non-creature spell, and Unwind's going to have us untap up to 3 lands. And next up, of course, we're going to be running a ton of blink spells like Cloud Shift, Essence Flex, Voyager Staff, Liberate, Long Road Home, Otherworldly Journey, Jeskar's Portal, Flicker of Fate, Momentary Blink, Turn to Mist, Siren's Ruse, and Teferi's Time Twist. Each of these can blink a creature, which again, in combination with Deep Glow Skate, is absolutely incredible. Not only can we utilize these to protect Deep Glow Skate, but we also get its ETB again. And yeah, if I haven't mentioned this earlier, you really need to make sure that you're set up before you get the Prismatic Bridge in play. If you don't have ways to blink or protect Deep Glow Skate yet, you might want to wait until you do so because the entire deck is built around it. And if you've got a couple of blink spells, you can get a lot of value out of Deep Glow Skate right away. And also just a quick note with Teferi's Time Twist, keep in mind that one exiles any permanent you control, so you can protect Prismatic Bridge with it as well. Next up, outside of using and abusing Deep Glow Skate's ETB, we also have other ways to get counters on our things, like Contentious Plan, Steady Progress, and Tezzeret's Gambit, which each let us proliferate. Proliferating basically means that we choose any number of permanents and/or players, then we give each another counter of each kind already there. These can actually be a great way for us to set up even before Deep Glow Skate gets into play. By getting an extra counter on that's essentially again another counter that can be doubled with Deep Glow Skate. And also I guess I should have mentioned that Contentious Plan and Steady Progress each draw us one card, and Tezzeret's Gambit's going to draw us two. So some nice additional benefits there as well. In terms of other things that proliferate, we're also going to be running Contagion Clasp and Plane-Wide Celebration. When Contagion Clasp enters the battlefield, we put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, and by paying 4 and tapping it, we proliferate. So again, thanks to that -1/-1 counter and Deep Glow Skate and proliferating, we can easily take out a creature with this. But more importantly, again, just by paying 4 and tapping it, we can get another counter on every single thing that we have that has counters. And then Plane-Wide Celebration, get a lot of counters all at once. It says choose 4, you may choose the same mode more than once. Create a 2/2 citizen creature token that's all colors, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, proliferate, and you gain 4 life. And the one that we're pretty much going to pick every single time is proliferating 4 times. That's a lot of counters on all of our things. But actually, we can utilize this to gain some life if we need to, get some tokens if we need to, or most importantly, get Deep Glow Skate back from our graveyard if it's dealt with. Or, another important permanent like Tel'Jalad Stylus. Regardless, although we did just talk about a couple of cards that do draw us cards, let's jump into some other ones that can draw us even more. First up, we're going to be running some enchantments like Monastery Siege and Firemind's Research. Monastery Siege has when it enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. If we choose Khans at the beginning of our draw step, we get an extra card, and then we discard a card. If we choose Dragons, spells our opponents cast that target us or a permanent we control cost 2 more to cast. Now, I'd say in the vast majority of decks, usually we'd pick Khans, but in this deck, it's kind of split depending on what our situation is. If we're just getting set up and we need to draw further into our deck, Khans is definitely a fantastic choice. But if we're already set up, Dragons is an incredible choice, basically making it so that our opponents have to pay extra mana just to target us or our things. That's a nice extra deterrent, especially when our opponents are going to already be hesitant to actually try to target Deep Glow Skate because we've got so many ways to protect it and so many blink spells. So an opponent might waste a spell and some extra mana trying to get rid of something that we can just easily protect. And then Firemind's Research helps us out in a different way. It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on it. By paying 1 in blue, remove 2 charge counters from it to draw a card, and by paying 1 in red, remove 5 charge counters from it, and it's going to deal 5 damage to any target. So this can help us draw cards or take out some creatures or some players. Speaking of which, there's Geistflame Reservoir, which has whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on it. By paying 1 in red, remove any number of charge counters from it and deals that much damage to any target. Or by paying the same amount and tapping it, exile the top card of your library, you may play that card this turn. So if we need it for temporary card advantage, great. If we needed to ping down some players, we most definitely can as well. Next up though, we have some massive ways to draw cards with Mind Unbound and Otherworld Atlas. Mind Unbound says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a lore counter on it, then draw a card for each lore counter on it. So this already builds on itself, getting us more and more cards on each of our upkeeps. And then Deep Glow Skate can just make that into an absurd amount. And speaking of an absurd amount, Otherworld Atlas has tap put a charge counter on it, and tap each player draws a card for each charge counter on it. Now, typically having our opponents draw cards is a bad thing, but we can actually utilize this to take out our opponents. Again, with enough charge counters on it, we can have players draw an absurd amount of cards. And thanks to Midnight Clock, or more so even Elixir of Immortality, we're not going to deck ourselves, but our opponents very much will be decked. Next up, there's Clock of Omens, which can actually help us a lot with a card like Otherworld Atlas and plenty of other cards in this deck. It says tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, untap target artifact. We've got a ton of artifacts in this deck with a lot of tap effects, so yeah, this can be huge. Whether that's getting another use out of Lux Cannon or something like Everflowing Chalice to generate an absurd amount of mana, yeah, Clock of Omens comes in huge, believe me. And with all that mana from our supercharged mana rocks, we can utilize some X spells like Epiphany of the Drownyard and Read the Runes. Epiphany of the Drownyard is basically a reverse Factor Fiction for X. And Read the Runes says draw X cards for each card drawn this way, discard a card unless you sacrifice a permanent. So this can help us dig deep into our deck, and actually, although it might not seem like it, we've got plenty of permanents that we're going to be willing to sacrifice once we're set up properly. Because we're going to be running a good amount of token generators in this deck like Ominous Seas, Golem Foundry, and Titan Forge. Ominous says whenever you draw a card, put a foreshadow counter on it, and by removing 8 foreshadow counters from it, we get an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. Golem Foundry has whenever you cast an artifact spell, put a charge counter on it, and by removing 3 of those counters, we get a 3/3 Golem. And then Titan Forge has pay 3 and tap it, put a charge counter on it, and by tapping it and removing 3 charge counters from it, we get a 9/9 Golem. And again, we can easily get a lot of tokens out of each of these thanks to Deep Glow Skate coming into play and getting its ETB over and over again. And speaking of a lot of tokens, how about Orochi Hatchery? It enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it, and by paying 5 and tapping it, we get a 1/1 snake creature token for each charge counter on it. And then Paradox Zone might not give us a ton of creatures, but it gives us some extremely large ones. It enters the battlefield with a growth counter on it. In the beginning of our end step, we double the number of growth counters on it. Then we get a fractal creature token with a number of ++1 counters on it equal to the number of growth counters on Paradox Zone. So the more counters we get on this, the more deadly our fractal tokens are. And speaking of deadly, how about Sphinx Bone Wand? It says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may put a charge counter on Sphinx Bone Wand. If you do, Sphinx Bone Wand deals damage equal to the number of charge counters on it, target creature or target player. So with this in play, and by doubling up its counters again and again and again, we can make our instants and sorceries incredibly deadly. But the deadliest and perhaps most surprising way for us to win the game is with Magistrate Scepter. It's an artifact for 3 that has pay 4 and tap it, put a charge counter on it. And then by tapping to remove 3 charge counters from it, we take an extra turn after this one. Yeah, we easily can get infinite turns with this with just very minimal setup. And again, with Elixir of Immortality in this deck, we are guaranteed never to mill ourselves, so your opponents, well, they should concede. Unless they really want to watch you play Solitaire and finish them off in other ways. Regardless, in these episodes, I typically just go through the non-land cards, which we already have, but I do want to highlight just a couple of lands that actually Deep Glow Skate makes fantastic in this deck. First up, how about Crawling Barrens, which has pay 4, put 2 ++1 counters on it, then you may have it become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn, it's still a land. This thing can become absolutely massive, again, just by paying that 4 once we get some counters on this, and then it can become absolutely huge. Next up, Mirrodin's Core has tap put a charge counter on it, and tap and remove a charge counter from it, add 1 mana of any color. With very minimal setup, again, this can basically become an extra command tower in this deck. And then Mage Ring Network has pay 1 and tap put a storage counter on it, and we can tap to remove any number of storage counters from it, and then add colors for each storage counter and move this way. So even our lands can produce an absurd amount of mana thanks to Deep Glow Skate. Speaking of which, in a very similar way, we're running Calciform Pools and Dreadship Reef and Fungal Reaches. Each of these act in a similar way to Mage Ring Network, being storage lands, but they can add mana in combination of 2 colors. And then finally, we're also going to be running the Vivid lands with Vivid Crag, Meadow, Creek, and Grove. They each come into play, tap with 2 charge counters on them, and just by tapping to remove a charge counter from them, they add 1 mana of any color. So again, in combination with Deep Glow Skate, these are essentially an extra command tower in this deck that, well, come into play tapped, and that's okay. But now that we've gone through these lands and every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned before, every single card in this deck outside of the Commander, Deep Glow Skate, and Astral Cornucopia is less than $1. So even with our Commander's price of $8.66, the estimated cost of this deck is still just $44.91. And also keep in mind that this cost actually does include basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you already have those, that's even more savings for you. And speaking of savings, you can save even more if you utilize heavily played and damage cards on TCG Player, and always remember that those cards need a home too. Though, do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.